In 2007, 6-month-old Khushboo Devi was taken from her local primary school and bludgeoned to death. When the girl's killer was later interviewed by the police, he swung his legs in the chair and asked for a biscuit. That killer was Amarjeet Sada, who, at 8 years old, was just a child himself. However, it would turn out that Khushboo was actually Amarjeet's third victim, making him, to date, the world's youngest serial killer. My name is Marianne L, and this is True Criminal.
Hello, welcome so much to my True Criminal abode. So, today's case. Today's case is about Amarjeet Sada. And Amarjeet was 8 years old, and he is called the world's youngest serial killer. Now, I know there are children that murder that are Amarjeet's age, or even younger in some cases. But what sticks out about Amarjeet is that he murdered 3 children over the space of about a year and a half, so between 2006 and 2007. So there were 3 separate murders, 3 different events taking place over a period of time. And by definition, that makes him technically a serial killer at 8 years old. So we're going to talk about Amarjeet today. Before I do, a quick trigger warning. Now, obviously, we are talking about a child that murders. His victims are children. It's a harrowing case with quite gruesome descriptions of the murders. So it's so important to me that you stay safe, you stay untriggered, you stay mentally strong and healthy. So if this isn't your bag today, that's fine. Just, hopefully we'll see you back here for another case, but look after yourself, okay? So today's video has been compiled using information available online. So a quick word about the sources. This case was really, really difficult to research. Number one, Amarjeet was a child, and very often, there's a certain amount of protection given to children. But the second thing is this case is based in India. And I think what's happened is over time, information has kind of become lost in translation, which can happen just over a period of time. Plus, you've got the language barrier with it being based in India. So there's quite a few gaps in the case, for one thing. But regarding the source material itself, it varies. So you've got name changes. So we're calling Amarjeet Sada. That's his name that I'm using in this video. But in some sources, he's called Amardeep or Amar. There's also gender changes and age differences. So you've got the cousin who is in some sources described as a male and in some cases described as a female. In some cases, one of the children is 6 months old, in another case, 6 years old. So it can be a bit confusing. So I have done the best I can, but a lot of the times I've had to kind of just go with what makes the most sense. or what's the most common information out there. But just so that you know, if you do decide to look at this case yourself, there might be some conflicting information, and that is why. Alrighty, so I think that's the boring stuff. Let's jump in. So our case begins in 2005, and Amarjeet is 7 years old at this point. He was born in 1998. So we're starting in 2005 when Amarjeet is 7, and he is living in a very small village in the state of Bihar, which is in East India, and that's where he lives with his family. Now, the village that he lived in, it was very, very poor. We're talking major poverty, serious unemployment. To this day, Bihar is one of the poorest states in India. So the family constantly struggled for money. Amarjeet's father worked as a farm labourer, and what he would do, he would travel around from farm to farm looking for work. So his work wasn't guaranteed. He was relying on somebody saying that they needed help for the day. So, with work not guaranteed, money was a struggle for the Sada household. Amarjeet's mother, she was a stay-at-home mum. She looked after Amarjeet. She looked after the house. And she doted on Amarjeet. Both Amarjeet's parents doted on him. He was their only son. So, it was natural that the parents doted on him. He was the apple of his mother's eye. Each day she would draw with, I never know how you pronounce it, but it's called kohl or kohl. It's Kohl. So it's kind of the eyeliner equivalent that we use. So she'd use this black kohl to draw a mark on Amarjeet's forehead, and she would do this each day, and that was supposed to ward off protection from the evils. Not ward off the protection, she wants to keep the protection. It was supposed to ward off the evils and give him protection from the world. But of course, as we're going to find out, it was the world that needed protection from Amarjeet. So, despite the family's extreme poverty, they tried their best to provide Amarjeet with the things he wanted. But Amarjeet could be really temperamental. He would sometimes understand when his parents said, "We just can't get you this, we're too poor." Other times he would sulk and he would throw tantrums. Now, this all sounds very normal so far, right? I mean, that's what children do. Children can be very temperamental. They can be happy one minute and then throwing something the next minute. But in Amarjeet's case, he had anger issues that were kind of growing, and it was getting worse over time, so much so that his parents were noticing. Also, the village he lived in was also noticing. So the village he lived in was very, very tight knit, and the children would very often play together. They would be outside on the streets, in the fields, climbing trees, doing the things that children do together. But it was very much a community affair. The whole community would come together. But Amarjeet, he was becoming known as a troublemaker. He was being mean to the other children. And I'm not just talking verbally, he was physically mean. He was kicking them and hitting them, and he was just getting this bad reputation for not being very nice. There was something kind of weird about Amarjeet. And ultimately, he became a bit of a loner. He was a solitary child. He preferred being in his own company, and it was probably safer for all the other children, to be honest, that he was. But he was becoming solitary and introverted. And this was definitely getting noticed by those around him. So a little while later, Amarjeet's mother becomes pregnant, and the family were thrilled. They, they really wanted this baby, but equally they were really worried. They had enough trouble feeding the people in their household as it was. So having a new baby was going to be a struggle for them. But still, they were excited. And one day, Amarjeet's aunt, so his mother's sister, she came to the house to talk to his mother. And she basically said that she had been offered a job in the city, which she desperately needed to take. She had a young baby, a 6-month-old baby herself. And they were also struggling. And so the fact that she'd been offered this job in the city, it was great because, she could go and work and get some money and get herself sorted out. But she needed Amarjeet's mother to look after the baby, and it was just for the month. So it wasn't for too long, but obviously Amarjeet's mother, she was pregnant and she was already worried about feeding her own family, having this other baby coming into the household. She was like, oh my gosh, I can't feed everybody. But her sister, so Amarjeet's aunt, said that she would give her some of the wages that she earned when she was in the city. So in the end, Amarjeet's mother agreed. So Amarjeet's cousin, 6-month-old cousin, came to live with the family. So Amarjeet's father is at work one day and his mother is looking after Amarjeet and the 6-month-old baby, and she realises that she needs to go and get some food. So she has to pop out and go to the market to go and get some food. And she didn't want to drag Amarjeet along, the 6-month-old baby along. She was pregnant herself. It was just easier to go herself. So she put Amarjeet's cousin in the cot and she told Amarjeet, look after your cousin. So his mother left the house and left Amarjeet in charge of his cousin. As soon as she left, Amarjeet, he went over to the cot where his cousin was sleeping and he started to slap him. The baby woke up and started crying. And the more the baby cried, the harder and harder Amarjeet would slap his cousin. And he would slap him, hit him, punch him, scratch him. He just really enjoyed watching his cousin screaming in pain and fear. But that wasn't enough for Amarjeet. Eventually, Amarjeet got kind of bored of just hitting his cousin. So he decided to reach his hands inside, wrap his fingers around his cousin's neck and squeeze. He strangled his cousin, 6-month-old baby. Amarjeet strangled him. Now, in some sources, Amarjeet strangled his cousin to death. But we don't know. We don't know for certain. But I really, really hope that Amarjeet strangled his cousin to death, because what he does next is horrific. He takes his cousin out to a field, picks up a rock and begins to smash his cousin's head in. Do you see why I'm hoping that he was strangled to death? Because if he wasn't strangled, if he hadn't died from being strangled, then he would be aware of being smashed in the head with a rock. And Amarjeet kept smashing and smashing away because that's what he wanted to see. That's what gave him satisfaction. Amarjeet is 8. 8. Let me just remind you, in case you've forgotten, he is 8 years old. He's strangled his cousin with his bare hands and then smashed his head in with a rock. So he basically I think he digs like a shallow grave, and covers his cousin in grass and leaves. Children that kill, they don't tend to use their bare hands to do it. Now, I know that there are cases where they do. Mary Bell, for instance, famous case over here in England, she strangled with her bare hands a couple of other kids. But usually, children will use a weapon. They don't usually get the same kind of that pleasure from using their hands to actually murder someone. Also, most children are found out after their first murder, so they don't go on to commit more murders. Now, Amarjeet was found out. He was found out. His mother came home and the baby had disappeared. So he was found out, because how was he going to explain that one away? But he didn't want to explain it away anyway, because he was, I don't know if proud is the right word, but he didn't care about what he had done. He openly admitted to his mother that he had murdered his cousin. He was just totally blasé about it. He was like, yep, I killed him. So his mother knew. So what were they going to do? Go to the police? You would think so. But she didn't. Nope. Didn't go to the police. When Amarjeet's father came home and he found out what his son had done, he went mad, obviously. But he beat his son up. He totally, beat Amarjeet to a pulp. So basically, Amarjeet's father's solution was to beat the murderer out of his son. But he agreed that they weren't going to go to the police. They got no help whatsoever for what had happened. They were going to protect their son. The son that they doted on, they were going to protect him at all costs. Because what would be the point in destroying Amarjeet's life any further? They couldn't bring the cousin back. But the problem was that Amarjeet's cousin's mother, she would be coming back from the city, and she'd want to know where her baby was. So they were going to have to explain somehow to the baby's mother what Amarjeet had done. So when she does come back to collect the child, they tell her that there's been a terrible accident. And Amarjeet is kind of peering around the doorway as the mother's being told. I mean, he's kind of grinning to himself because he doesn't care what he's done. But does the mother go to the authorities? No. Obviously, they're going to be distraught. But they also agree that there is no point disgracing the family's name and ruining Amarjeet's life. And so from this point on, the entire family, including the murdered baby's parents, deem this a family matter, and life resumes to normal, or as normal as it could. So Amarjeet quite literally got away with murder, literally. So a little while later, his mother gives birth, because remember, she was pregnant, and somehow, I mean, you would think the stress of what happened to the cousin would kind of induce labour. Anyway, she gives birth. And if that was me, knowing what my son had done to the cousin, I would not let my baby out of my sight, away from my side, until that baby was at least 18 years old. But I think Amarjeet's parents genuinely believed it was a one-off. I don't think they thought he was going to do it again. I think they were probably in the back of their mind thinking it was just an accident. And I guess if your child murders a baby, it's natural to be not thinking the worst of your child. But still, I still wouldn't let my baby out of my sight. But they did. When Amarjeet's sister, who obviously his parents doted on the little girl, Amarjeet was having problems connecting, let's say. And when she was about 8 months old, their parents went to take an afternoon nap. And they left the baby in the cot. Now, the house isn't massive. It's not a massive house, so I don't think the cot was too far away. But it was obviously far enough away that they didn't know what was going on, what happened next. And basically, this is kind of a repeat of what happened to his cousin. So he goes over to the baby, over to his sister. And this is his own flesh and blood at this point. This is his sister. But unlike his cousin, who he enjoyed slapping and making scream, with this baby, he couldn't allow that to happen because it would wake his parents up. So he put his hands around his sister's neck and quickly squeezed quickly and hard enough that the baby was unable to make a noise. She was being choked and she couldn't make a noise. She couldn't scream out. She couldn't alert the parents. And he squeezed and he squeezed. And this time he did strangle the baby to death. He murdered his sister. He murdered his flesh and blood. So he strangles his sister to death. What does he do? He goes back to playing with his toys, as if nothing had happened. Once again, he didn't care. Nothing had happened as far as he was concerned. It was like, whatever. He was playing with his toys. His parents woke up and he was playing with his toys. His parents went over to the cot. Well, you can imagine. They put 2 and 2 together, and it's quite rare that people put 2 and 2 together and actually come out with the correct number. But this time they did. It was Amarjeet. His mother was distraught. His mother was beside herself. And his father, obviously he was distraught, but again, for the second time, he beat his son to a pulp because it had worked so well the first time that he was going to do it again. This was how he was going to deal with his son. He was going to hopefully successfully this time beat the murderer out of him. But once again, the family deemed it a private matter. They weren't going to go to the police. They weren't going to ruin their son's life. Even though he'd just killed his sister, they were going to cover it up. And just like that, Amarjeet's got away with murder again. I mean, he's learning absolutely nothing from his parents. He's learning, if anything, he's learning from his father that violence is okay. He clearly needs some kind of help at this point. But nobody gets it for him. And it's a little bit unclear from the sources how much the villagers are aware. Now, we know that they're kind of aware that Amarjeet's a little bit odd, that there's something kind of weird about that kid. But in some sources I've seen, there was so much ruckus going on in that house. You know, the father was beating his son and the mother was screaming at the death of her child, that some of the villagers, some of the neighbours came over to find out what on earth was going on. Whether or not that is true, there is no doubt that suspicions weren't aroused in the village. So if it's true, then the neighbours were also covering it up. If the neighbours weren't aware, they knew something weird was going on. So when 2 children disappear in the village, you would think somebody would kind of be, how have these 2 children just disappeared? Where are they? And surely somebody would say something. But nobody did. So all Amarjeet is learning is that adults cover for his crimes. So in a nutshell, Amarjeet, he's not learning anything. He's not getting any help. he's going to do it again. Why wouldn't he? And he did. So, a young mother in the village, Khushboo Devi, she has a young 6-month-old daughter. And she really needs to get some chores done. And that's quite difficult to do when you've got a young baby in tow. So she takes her daughter to childcare, which is based at the local primary school. And she drops her daughter off. She wasn't going to be particularly long. She just needed to get what she needed to get done. Yeah, so she wasn't very long. And so she went back to the primary school a little while later to pick up her daughter. Her daughter was called Khushboo. And Khushboo wasn't there. She disappeared. Khushboo was 6 months old, so she didn't just get up and walk away. And this village in India is very, obviously we know there's poverty. So the primary school is primitive. There's no security there. There's no security cameras or security desks or gates or any of that stuff. And none of the staff knew where Khushboo had gone, which is kind of weird. She hadn't walked off and nobody saw anything. Chun was obviously devastated, and she frantically searched around the village looking for Khushboo, or at least looking for anybody that had taken Khushboo or knew what had happened to Khushboo. And so she's running around the village, kind of, have you seen my daughter? And eventually she runs in to a member of the Sada family. And this member of the family, we don't know who it is, but they told Chun, okay, well, I don't know where your daughter is, but I have a good idea what might have happened to her. Now, thank God for this family member, because obviously the family were not going to say anything. They were going to keep this under wraps. So good on this family member for actually telling Chun that, okay, this could have happened, because it had happened. This is what happened. But unfortunately, it was too late for Khushboo. She was located a little while later in a shallow grave, covered with grass and leaves. It was the Amarjeet hallmark. I mean, he has his own little hallmark at this point. He's 8 and he's got a hallmark of how he goes about covering it up. So Amarjeet is confronted, and he admits it. He's like, yeah, I killed her. I covered her up. He even takes the villagers to the location where he covered up Khushboo's body. He takes the villagers there. That's how, I keep using the word proud, but I don't think that's the right word. I'm not sure what the right word is I'm looking for. He doesn't care. He just does not care. I mean, he's got this, yeah, whatever, I killed her, so kind of attitude. And I don't think it's necessarily a proudness. Some people say that he didn't seem to be aware of what he'd done. And I don't see that either. I think he knew what he had done, which is why I'm struggling to find the right word, because he knew what he had done, but it didn't affect him. It didn't bother him. So he was fully aware. Whether he didn't understand the consequences, I mean, at 8, you know what death is. Like, obviously, you haven't got an adult brain to know exactly what death is, but you know that if somebody dies, they're not going to come back. So I don't know. I don't know what that was, but he didn't care. He just didn't care. But at this point, by murdering Khushboo, he'd taken his murder outside of the family. So his parents, they couldn't cover this up anymore. He'd gone outside the family. They could not protect their son from that. And so the police were called, and Amarjeet was arrested at 8 years old. He was arrested and taken to the police station to be interrogated. And sitting opposite the police whilst being interrogated was an 8-year-old serial killer. He was so young that his feet didn't even reach the floor. He's swinging his legs around. So Amarjeet quickly confessed to the police. He was happy to confess. Although there was one thing, he did ask for biscuits, apparently, which when I heard this, I thought, oh my goodness me, it's innate, this killing thing, because you see sort of adult killers when they're being interrogated, they will kind of bargain with the police. They'll be like, yep, I'll tell you the information you need, but I need whatever I need, bring me cigarettes, bring me food, or I don't know, something. They kind of do this sort of exchange with the police for information. And at 8 years old, Amarjeet was like, yep, I'll tell you, but just give me some biscuits. Anyway, so Amarjeet quickly confessed to the police, and he basically said that he'd taken Khushboo from the school and he tried to strangle her, but he wanted more. So he picked up a brick or a rock and smashed her head in, exactly the same as he had done with his cousin, which is why I kind of wonder with the cousin whether he did actually strangle his cousin to death because of this wanting something more. With Khushboo, we know that from what Amarjeet said, he wanted to see the fear in her eyes. So I think it was a similar situation, that he tried to strangle her, wanted something more, and then used the rock or the brick to really inflict absolute torture. Yeah. It, it's actually, it's really difficult to talk about because this is a little baby, and it's just the thought that an 8-year-old could do that to a little baby, the thought that anybody could do that to a little baby, an 8-year-old, and just the helplessness. A small baby like that, they can't even fight back. They can't even try and defend themselves. They're totally helpless and can't do anything about what is happening to them. And it's hard. Anyway, so yeah, so he told the police that he needed to see more, and that's what he did. And then he buried her and covered her with grass and leaves. I mean, we know that Amarjeet is quite a creepy kid. And the way that the Bihar police describe him, they say that he didn't speak much, but he smiled a lot. And a lot of the sources talk about the way that Amarjeet grinned. Through all the crimes, he grinned about it. He was smiling all the time. It's totally not normal. And I think that's why a lot of sources say that he didn't seem to understand what he did. To me, if he wanted something else, if just hitting and making a child scream isn't enough, then you know what you're doing. Even if you're 8, it doesn't matter, you know what you're doing. But the police described him as being not particularly nervous, and he didn't show any remorse. And throughout all these murders, that's one of the key things. He at no point showed any remorse. Even his own sister, his own flesh and blood. I mean, I know his cousin's his flesh and blood, but we're talking direct flesh and blood. This is your sister. There was nothing. Psychiatrists studied Amarjeet. Now, obviously, you're going to imagine that psychiatrists are going to be pretty fascinated in trying to understand what makes Amarjeet tick. And one particular psychological assessment, it described Amarjeet as a sadist that derived pleasure from inflicting injury on others. And they describe it as a case of psychopathy, which, frankly, I agree with. I mean, You can't diagnose children as psychopaths. You can't. But if he hadn't been caught and left unattended, he was growing up to be a psychopath, in my opinion, without doubt. The way that he's described as not having any emotion, any feeling, any understanding, any remorse, but he was carrying on as normal at the same time, those are psychopathic traits. The only bit of doubt I have with that is psychopaths are very good at kind of fitting in to society. And obviously people noticed he was kind of becoming a loner and insular and introvert, and people were noticing, so he wasn't covering it up very well. But those things I think would have come, and he had the potential, I think, possibly to become psychopathic, but I'm not a professional, so please let me know what you think. But yeah, I mean, that's just my opinion. In the end, he's diagnosed with something called conduct disorder, and that is categorized by a disregard for other people, antisocial behaviour, all the things Amarjeet was doing, physical violence, rule breaking, lying, except he didn't lie. That's the other interesting thing. Apparently, when he was asked why he didn't lie, why he was so quick to just say, yep, I killed the kids and here's the bodies, he said that his mother taught him it was wrong to lie. He clearly knows right from wrong then. If his mother teaches him it's wrong to lie, so he openly admits what he's done and where the children are, then he knows what he's doing and he knows the difference between right and wrong. But anyway, so he was diagnosed with conduct disorder, and one of the main things about conduct disorder is that children with this show very little sign of remorse or guilt, and that's Amarjeet to a T. So in 2007, Amarjeet Sada appeared in court for the murder of Khushboo Devi. He was never charged with the murders of his sister or his cousin. Allegedly, the reason for that is his parents and his family didn't want to press charges. I don't know how true that is, but he was never charged with their murders. And that's kind of why there's little information as to exactly what happened to them. We just sort of have Amarjeet's word for what happened. So yeah, so he was charged with Khushboo's murder. He appears in court, and he's 8. He's 8 years old. So he is very under the age of criminal responsibility. And so obviously he wasn't sentenced as an adult. So he was sent to juvenile prison for 3 years, which was the maximum under Indian law that he could get. So after that 3 years, he was then sent to a children's home where he carried out the rest of his sentence. I think it was in Munga, somewhere nearby. And he was 18 when he was released, officially released. So this was in 2016. The exact details are unknown. This is one of those areas where it's a little bit unclear exactly what happens to him after those sort of first 3 years. So he ends up in this children's home, and he apparently does get, throughout his incarceration, he does get treatment and help, apparently. But let's hope so, because like I say, he was released in 2016 when he's 18 years of age. And so to this day, nobody knows where he is because he was given a new identity, which is pretty common with cases of children that commit murder. When they're adults, they're given new identities so that they can try and carry out a normal life. And so, yeah, nobody knows where he is. He is probably walking the streets, unless, of course, he has committed an offence again, in which case he could be inside again. We don't know. The rumours, and I must stress these are rumours and speculation, but the rumours that, well, I won't say, you can find out there. There's a name he's been given, apparently, and he allegedly is married as well. I'm not going to say the name because we don't know for sure. We don't know if this guy is Amarjeet, and if it's not, then this poor guy's name is out there as being Amarjeet, so I'm not going to add to that. So that's the case of Amarjeet Sada, who is the world's youngest serial killer. I'm actually slightly lost for words. I don't know what to say now, because what do you say to that? Even though it's the end of the case, it's kind of not, because there is speculation out there, which I will briefly talk about. And I say briefly because I don't buy it. But I think it's important to acknowledge in this case. And it makes sense as to why people are thinking and speculating about this case. So basically, the main theory that surrounds this case is that Amarjeet didn't murder those 3 children. That's the speculation that people are saying, that Amarjeet was not responsible for the murders. Now, there's kind of 2 parts. So either Amarjeet didn't kill all 3 children, so another older, different family member murdered all 3 children. The second part is that another older, different family member murdered the first 2 children, but Amarjeet murdered Khushboo because Amarjeet witnessed this other family member murdering the other 2 children, and so kind of knew what to do and knew how to conceal a body, and basically copycatted this other family member's murder of the other 2 children. So yeah, so basically the theory is either this different family member murdered all 3 and coerced Amarjeet into covering for them, or that they murdered at least the first 2, and so why it suddenly went outside the family is because Amarjeet kind of saw this thing happen, was like, oh, I'll give it a go one day, and ended up murdering Khushboo. It sounds a bit weird, right? Why would a different family member want to murder? So where does the speculation come from? So the speculation is based on how traditional cultural values in India have led to social inequalities, in particular in gender. There's also social inequalities in class, but of relevance to this case are the gender inequalities. And so if we look at those gender inequalities, I don't want to stereotype or say all of India has these values, but it's an issue that exists. So basically, where these values are prominent, the families value boys more than girls. This is largely because girls are seen as a financial burden. They're a gift, they love their girls, but they're a gift that is ultimately given away to a husband. And not only do they give the girl away to the husband, they also need to pay the husband's family a dowry. So they kind of need to pay for giving that girl away. Boys, on the other hand, they can work. They can provide financially. They can look after their parents in old age. And as a result of these different values of the ways of looking at boys and girls, sex-selective abortion and female infanticide, they are a social problem that exists in India. In other words, a large proportion of girls are either aborted before they are born, or they are murdered after they are born. And that's why this theory, this speculation has come about. Now, you know how quite a few times I have stressed the financial situation of the Sada family. This is why it's important to stress that financial situation. Equally, a lot of India is in poverty, and Bihar, the state that Amarjeet was from, the state in particular is known for its poverty. So this isn't unique to the Sada family. And not all the children are running around murdering everybody, but it's still important to understand just because of where this speculation comes from. So the speculation is basically this is why another family member, they wanted to murder the girls in the family because of the poverty or because of the dire financial situation of the family who couldn't afford to keep these girls. Now, there's a wee bit of a problem with this theory. Number one, you know how I've said the sources differ? We don't know for sure the gender of the cousin. I think I've referred to the cousin as a male for this case, but we don't know. He, she is referred to as both a male or a female. If the cousin was a male, well, then why would they kill the boy? If the cousin was a female, okay, let's go with it. Let's run with it. It's got some legs, this theory. But why kill Khushboo? Doesn't make sense. And I think that's where the speculation has then kind of morphed to being, well, maybe the other family member killed the first two and then Amarjeet copycatted and killed Khushboo. And I think that's why the speculation kind of morphed a little bit to try and explain that bit away. So the theory's not really working so far. Not if you have to keep kind of morphing the theory to kind of explain what's wrong with the theory. And then we've got a third problem. Let's say, for argument's sake, another family member did want to get rid of the girls. Well, then why not just make it look like an accident? You know, I don't know, whatever accident you're going to do. Basically, you wouldn't involve an 8-year-old. Why would you involve an 8-year-old in the murders? It doesn't make any sense at all. You would just make it look like an accident and not involve a child, because then you've got the added complication of the child having to continue lying. And he's 8, and he gave in-depth information to the police. Well, if he was covering, I mean, either he's a flipping good actor or he just did it. Because how would he have kept his story straight? And then he was incarcerated for almost 10 years, and he was seen by multiple psychiatrists, psychologists, whoever. Somewhere along the lines, he would have messed up. He would have fluffed his lines somewhere along there. And it just does not make sense. You know, the investigations, the treatments, the psychiatrist reports, even talking to other kids in the children's home, it would have got out. He couldn't have kept it. He just couldn't have kept it secret, I don't think. And personally, what I think is that people create these theories and they look somewhere else because they don't want to believe that an 8-year-old is capable of such horrific acts of violence. Nobody wants to believe that of a child. By shifting the responsibility from the child to the adult, it just helps to rationalise what happened. It's far easier to think of that than to think of an 8-year-old committing the crimes. But children do commit crimes. Throughout history, we have seen children that commit murders. With Amarjeet, it's not an exception, I don't think. But it's interesting. It's interesting to understand why he did it. To me, everything so far along the lines has kind of hinted in this innate sort of instinct in him to kill. Now, obviously, the sources, they're not the best. There's not much information out there. But from what information is out there, there's nothing that hints or suggests any kind of abuse in the home, trauma, anything like that. I mean, I don't know. He could have hit his head at some point. I don't know. There's nothing that says anything like that. So all we can do is kind of speculate and guess. So I don't know. But to me, it seems to be more of a instinctual need to kill, as opposed to, you know, it's more the nature side rather than nurture side, as in there doesn't seem to be some social reason for him becoming this way. But we can't say for certain because, you know, we just don't know. We just don't know what happened, why he turned out that way. That's why cases like this are so interesting to study, at least by professionals. So I really hope that professionals are still looking at this case, and that they've spent the 10 years when Amarjeet was incarcerated really studying him to try and prevent this happening again, to try and understand where this came from and what can be done to prevent it in future. But no matter what, there is one thing amongst all the uncertainty that surrounds this case, there is one thing for certain, and it really peeves me off big time, and that is that the Sada family, they covered up those murders. They knew what had happened. Khushboo did not need to die. Amarjeet's sister did not need to die. If they had done something after the cousin, then the sister and Khushboo would still be alive. But Khushboo, 100%, should not have died. And for that reason, I think that the parents, they should have been charged along with Amarjeet. They are just as responsible. And it really peeves me off because they enabled their son, and an innocent baby lost her life because the adults, for whatever reason, whether it was because Amarjeet was a boy, whether it was just because he was their son, they were going to protect him no matter what, even if it meant another life would be lost, and another life was lost, and unnecessarily so. And yeah, it peeves me off. So as far as I'm concerned, the parents of Amarjeet Sada are just as guilty as the boy that they were so desperate to protect. But that's just my opinion, and well, I'm sure that you will have something to say. Please let me know what you think below. I'd love to know what you think, actually, because there's so many gaps in this case. There's so many kind of things that we're just kind of guessing on. And I'm a big kind of if you're doing the sort of nature versus nurture debate, I studied social psychology, so I'm very much on the social side. It doesn't mean that I don't think the nature side doesn't exist, because it does. I think biology is just as important, and it's usually a bit of both. It's usually a bit of nature, a bit of nurture, there's a bit of both going on. But in this case, I can't seem to see much on the side of the nurture. Apart from the poverty, but lots of people are poor and they don't go around killing people, there doesn't seem to be any nurture. So, yeah, I don't know. But again, it could just be because of the gaps in the case and there's stuff that we don't know. That could be the reason. We don't know what's going on. I mean, his father clearly beat him, and whether he beat him only after he'd killed or whether that was something that ran in the family, I don't know. And again, would that lead you to kill anyway? Yeah. So let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed the case. Well, God, I hope you didn't enjoy the case, because if you enjoyed the case, there's something wrong with you. So go sort yourself out. I hope you didn't enjoy the case, but I hope to see you back here for another case that you will hate just as much as this one. Okie dokie. Life is too short to not do what you want. So do you. Bye.